Hi everyone, and welcome back to our channel. Now today's story is going to be a little bit of a creepy one. It's definitely one that is very close to me and my culture. If you haven't heard about this, there was a movie made a few years ago, but it was not the best representation of it, especially coming from a culture that understands this story and talks about it very much. So if you haven't guessed, today's story is actually going to be about La Llorona. But before we get into today's story, I do want to send a quick reminder to please consider subscribing. If you guys enjoy this type of content, we post 2 to 3 times a week, and we like to talk about stuff like the paranormal, true crime, and unsolved mystery. Now, the story of La Llorona goes back many, many years ago. It goes hundreds of years back, and it's actually used as a tale to scare little children into being obedient. And it's actually become very, very popular in the past few, I would say maybe the past decade or so. It's definitely grown out outside of the Latin American culture. So a lot of people in Canada, in the States, have now heard about this story. So much so that they did make a movie about it. I don't know if you guys have seen it, but it was not a very accurate representation of what it was. I personally feel like they modernized it way too much. It should have been a little bit more authentic to its roots. But nonetheless, we're going to go into the story of where it actually came from. And then I'm going to share a few experiences and some stories I came across as well. So the story of La Llorona actually begins in Mexico, and it has to do with a woman called Maria. Now, Maria actually came from a very, very poor family. She was also very, very poor. And as life would have it, she actually met a man who was very wealthy. They ended up falling in love. They got married, and everything seemed like a fairy tale until it wasn't. Shortly after they got married, the couple got pregnant and they ended up having 2 children, 2 little boys. Unfortunately, that also started the downward spiral of their relationship. Maria's husband would spend less and less time with her. He wouldn't really pay attention to the kids, and if he did, it was very, very minimal. He would find every excuse not to be at home, and this left her feeling very sad and wondering why he just didn't love her anymore. And eventually, one day, Maria actually caught her husband with another woman. So obviously, this enraged her. This completely threw Maria off. And it seems from the story, it seems like she had some sort of mental breakdown, because what she did next is definitely not a normal reaction to this sort of thing. So she takes her children to a nearby river and actually ends up drowning them. And then there's some speculation as to what happened after, but from what we know, she completely regretted this decision and started screaming out. And these are the screams that people actually report hearing. But she started screaming in Spanish, yelling out, "Ay, mis hijos," which means my sons, my sons. So these are the screams that people actually report hearing in the middle of the night. So right after, she actually ends up drowning herself. And the story goes is that when she got to heaven, God denied her access to heaven. And he told her that what she had done was unforgivable, and that the only way that she could get into heaven was if she were to go back down to earth and look for the souls of her 2 children. She was sent back down to earth, condemned to looking for her 2 children, which she seems to have not found. Now, the legend goes on, and a lot of the sightings and sounds that people have heard of La Llorona often come from nearby bodies of water, because it makes sense that she would be looking for her children near lakes, swamps, rivers. But it's definitely very, very widespread. A lot of people have heard her in many different countries across Latin America. And there's even been some sightings of people seeing her not too far off in the distance. And a lot of them come back saying that she's wearing a full-on wedding dress, a very, very big white gown, and that her face is actually also covered as well. Now, I actually came across a really creepy video of what someone is claiming that this is La Llorona's screams. From what I've been told from my family and just from other research, it doesn't sound as high-pitched as I would have imagined it to be, but it's definitely very creepy, so I'll insert it here.
Me desperté porque escuché unos pinches gritos. Son la 1 de la mañana. Se escuchan cabrón, Pero cabrón. No mames. ¿Qué pedo? ¿Qué pedo con eso? ¿Qué es?
So very creepy, definitely gave me goosebumps the first time I heard it. Like I said earlier, a lot of people that I've talked to say that her screams are more high-pitched, they're much more intense, but this is definitely an interesting video. If it's not La Llorona, it does make me wonder what could be making sounds like that at all, really. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Do you think that was La Llorona? Do you think it's something else? So like I said earlier, because my family does have Latin background, me and my siblings were born in Canada, but that didn't mean that we didn't grow up with our fair share of culture and understanding of where we come from and what goes on back home. And that also included the legend of La Llorona. So originally, this story was told to a lot of children, including us, in order to keep them in line, because as the story goes, this woman is out searching for her kids. So parents would use this story to kind of scare children into being obedient. Like, if you don't listen, La Llorona is going to come get you. So as you could imagine, if we've been told this story, then my parents were definitely told this story, considering they grew up back home. And my dad has had more experiences with this than anyone else that I know of. And what he would tell us was very, very scary, especially when we were younger. He had a few different experiences, and so did his brother. And one of these was when my dad was in his room, and he was young at the time. I think he was like a tween or so, early teens. And he remembers laying in bed, and it was in the middle of the night. And then he just had this overwhelming feeling of like silence, and that everything had gone completely still. Even though it was at night, things had gone quieter than quiet in the room. And then that's when he heard it. He started hearing these very, very high-pitched screams going down the front street of where their house was. Now, where their house is that there's houses on both sides of the street, and they kind of connect into multiple alleyways. So all he hears is this woman screaming like someone is literally hurting her, or that she's been hurt. And it starts going in and out of the house. It almost sounds like it's coming into the room at one point. And all he could do is sit there in fear until eventually it starts fading and fading and fading away. The next experience actually happened to my dad's brother. Now, he was a bus driver back home, and on one of his shifts, he was actually out late at night and he was taking a break. So he had decided to pull over and take a nap inside of the bus. And he was alone. There wasn't a lot of people in the area. And that's when he heard the screams. He just heard the wailing coming closer and closer and closer to the bus. And all he could do was like sink low into the seat and pretend that he wasn't there. That's all he could really do. He remembers just being frozen in place until this voice ended up disappearing. Now, I came across a few stories online about this too, and some of them were definitely creepier than the others. So let me know if you guys like this sort of thing when I add on some stories that I find online to the original story, just to enhance it a little bit. One night, it was just like any other night. I lived in a trailer with my mom and dad. My youngest brother was staying with my aunt this night. I fell asleep watching Jay Leno as usual, and when I woke up, I was on the sofa in my living room. The time was 4 a.m., which illuminated from the stove in the kitchen. The television was off, and normally I had a light on, but this time it was pitch black. I woke up and heard a horrible screaming that was coming from far in the distance. The screaming was coming from a ditch that was a few feet away from my home. I heard it and thought I was hearing things. I asked myself, am I dreaming? Then I started to hear the animals outside howling and whimpering. These animals that I speak of are cats and dogs. As the screaming got closer, the animals continued to cry. The screaming was something I have never experienced ever before. It sounded like I was in a big hallway and a woman was screaming her guts out down the hallway. Then in all the screaming, I started to make out words. These words, being said by whoever this was at 4 a.m., screaming their guts out, shocked me. The woman said, "Ay, mis hijos." In a huge panic, I got up quickly from the sofa and ran to the kitchen, which was right next to where I fell asleep. I turned the closet light and looked around. The screaming didn't stop. In fact, the screaming only got louder and closer. I questioned my sanity at that moment. Was I going crazy or hearing things? Then I thought to myself, this is real, and the animals are responding to it in a negative way. So I did what any other 11-year-old boy would do in a moment like this. I ran to my mom and dad's room. I reached for my mom and shook her awake violently. She woke up slowly, and to my amazement, the screaming had faded away as she woke awake. I thought to myself, what the heck is going on? I told my mom, "Mom, do you hear the screaming lady?" My mom was half asleep, and she said, "Go back to sleep. It's most likely just your imagination." I told her, "No, this is real. Please listen. Don't you hear?" My mom quickly just said, "You're dreaming. Go back to sleep. It's going to be okay." By then, the screaming had long faded away, like whoever was screaming knew that there was an adult awake. I was terrified as I returned to the living room and quickly turned on the television as I left most of the lights on. I didn't go back to sleep until the sun came up. I couldn't believe what I had heard and witnessed. I was treated like a crazy person whenever I told my story. It got so bad that I kept the experience to myself. To this day, I don't care what people think of my experience. I know what I heard. A couple of years later, it happened to me again. This story takes place after the first incident with the woman known as La Llorona. Not much happened after the first time I heard her. An incident occurred with my aunt about a year after my encounter. According to my aunt, they were sleeping and suddenly there was a horrible sound coming from the ditch located in front of their house. There is a street in between the ditch and the house, but her house and the ditch are really close to one another. It was about 2:30 a.m. when my aunt was awakened by a screaming woman coming from the ditch. She figured maybe somebody was being hurt or attacked. She walked out to the front yard looking towards the ditch and saw there was no woman. My cousin, her daughter, walked out to the front as well, asking what was happening. My aunt, of course, had no idea as the screaming grew closer. Then they saw her, a woman in a white dress. The only thing that shook them to the bone was the woman had no feet and was clearly floating. One other feature that threw them off was that this woman had no face. They both just turned after seeing that and ran inside my house. My aunt locked the door and called the police. The police showed up minutes later and took their claim seriously. El Paso PD was soon looking for the area where this woman was seen and heard screaming. The police soon returned and said there was no evidence that a woman was there. They looked at the area where the woman was seen walking and not even footprints were found. One police officer even asked my aunt if maybe she was dreaming. The next day is when I went over to visit and I saw my cousin like I have never seen her before. She had black bags under her eyes and she hasn't slept since the incident. I asked her what happened and she said she saw what my aunt saw, the screaming woman with no feet and no face. It took her a while to sleep normal again. She never heard or saw La Llorona again, but to this day she won't deny that she witnessed something that she can't explain. Unlike my cousin, I don't have the luck of avoiding La Llorona. It was in the early 2000s when I worked here in El Paso, Texas at a local supermarket. One of the shifts that I worked was 3 a.m. to 12 p.m. The store was located in the lower valley of El Paso. In the back of the store, a small ditch. One early morning about 4 a.m., I had the back doors open and I was taking the empty milk crates outside in the back. I was working with two other guys at the time of this incident. One of the guys, named R, thought it would be funny to close the back doors and lock me outside as a joke. When I heard the doors close shut, I knew he was just messing around. I thought to myself, I will just stay quiet and wait for him to open the doors again. I wasn't going to give in to his joke of trying to scare me. I stood by the door smiling and thinking to myself, he's not going to scare me. I could hear R laughing on the other side of the doors. I thought to myself, well, the joke's on him because I am not scared. About 1 minute later, in the far distance, I heard screaming, and I thought to myself, it's the same screaming that I had heard when I was 11 years old. The screaming got louder and closer to me. I felt a chill down my spine, and I felt that I was being watched by some unseen force. I felt a sense of hopelessness. It was a feeling unlike any other. I started pounding on the door. I yelled, let me in, there is somebody out here. I pounded my fists and started knocking and kicking the door. I could hear R laughing on the other side of the door. I started to kick the door harder. The screaming was now coming from right in the back of me. Just then, R opened the door and said, what is that? I just ran inside screaming and locked the warehouse door. R said, why was that lady screaming? Did she need help? I told him I don't think that was a lady. I told him what happened to me when I was younger. R told me, don't you think maybe you're cursed or is she following you? I stayed quiet when he told me that. I wouldn't work my shift normally after. It took me a few hours to get over what happened. I admit I was scared and maybe R was right. Was she following me? There's one more incident that took place right after. In 2015, I started working as a custodian. Behind the school is the border highway, the Rio Grande, of course, covered by a huge metal fence that separates Mexico from El Paso. I worked the night shift from 2:30 to 11 p.m. One night I was stuck working with another custodian until midnight. Right when we were about to leave, we do a walkthrough of the school to make sure all doors are locked on the outside. I worked with another custodian named C. C always told me that he had never believed in ghosts up until that night, I can say. We walked to our cars, and just as I was about to leave, I saw C had opened his hood of his car, then asked me, hey, can you give me a jump? My car battery is dead. I told him, yes, of course. Just as I stepped out of my car, a loud screaming comes from the Rio Grande. All of the animals in the nearby neighborhood start howling and crying. Once again, the screaming resembled a woman screaming her guts out in the hallway as it echoed all over. C looked at me and said, oh my God, is that a demon? I said, no, that's La Llorona. He looked at me and said, no way, she can't be real. Then I said, I've heard her before. I gave him a jump, and just then we saw a border patrol jeep speeding towards the screaming woman. Just then I thought to myself, I can record this and share it with the world. I took my phone out, and just as I hit the record, the screaming faded away. C and I looked at each other, and he said, what was that? He said, sorry, Jay, I'm leaving before the evil witch comes back to get us. We both left, and the very next day, C was telling everybody at work how he heard the witch crying the night before. That was the last time I encountered her. I don't think it's the last time, as I feel she may choose who hears her or sees her. So definitely a very, very creepy story. Very much aligned with the versions of the story that I grew up being told. So I'm more inclined to believe this story because the details just seem very, very accurate, especially the part about the animals screaming or howling when something like this happens. I'm not sure if you guys know, but animals are actually a very good indicator as to when there are negative entities around us. They do have additional senses that allow them to see and feel things that we necessarily cannot. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Do you guys think La Llorona is real? Is she just an urban legend? Have you guys experienced La Llorona? I would love to know your comments below. So let me know, give me some stories. Let me know what you guys think, and I will see you guys in the next one.